Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to look at something you've probably seen 1,000 times, but, maybe never really stopped to think about. Glass bangles. I mean, they catch the light beautifully, right? They come in literally every color of the rainbow, but as we'll see in the source material, there is this incredibly harsh juxtaposition between these bright, sparkling outputs and the really gritty, hidden realities of how they're actually made. We're going to break down the physical process step by step and then take a hard look at the human environment surrounding it. Let's get right into it.
Okay, let's dive into this. Every single one of these glass bangles starts its life in a place of just absolute blistering heat. The tank furnaces used in this industry, they run somewhere between 1,300 and 1,400 degrees Celsius. To put that into perspective, that is literally hotter than molten lava. It's intense. And inside these ridiculously hot furnaces, raw soda glass is completely melted down into this glowing, viscous liquid. So this is the very first, highly volatile environment where the long journey of a bangle actually begins.
Now, what's truly fascinating here is just the sheer mechanical synchronization required to shape that 1,400-degree molten glass. It's kind of like a multi-step ballet. First up, an artisan uses a long iron pole to just scoop out a glob of that molten soda glass. Then it's swiftly handed off to be shaped into a cone using a specialized trowel. And here's the crazy part. In this highly precise movement, a super thin filament of this molten glass is drawn out and placed onto a motor-driven spindle that's constantly spinning. So the glass just loops around the rod, stacking up to look like this long, glowing glass spiral. An artisan actually holds a metallic ruler right up against it to make sure only one layer rolls on and nothing sticks together. Finally, once that whole spiral is formed and cooled down, they use a diamond cutter to slice straight down the line. This separates the spiral into individual but open-ended rings.
But those open-ended rings aren't actually finished yet, and that brings us to a process called judai, which literally translates to joining. Basically, they take those cut glass spirals, and the open ends are really carefully brought together over an open flame, which a lot of the time is literally just a candle or a tiny kerosene lamp. The heat just slightly melts the tips, allowing them to fuse completely into a circle. It's incredibly delicate, meticulous work, and it's usually done by women who sit there for hours on end, hunched over these small, flickering flames, just trying to close the loop of the bangle.
So after that whole judai process, the bangles might get decorated with zari or some metallic powders, but they definitely still have rough edges. So they have to go through one final step known as the pakai bati. Think of this as the final baking furnace. The heat here serves a dual purpose. It completely smoothens out any sharp, potentially dangerous edges left over from the cutting process, and it's also what gives the glass its signature bright, glossy, really attractive finish. It's only after surviving the pakai bati that these bangles are finally intertwined, strung together, and packed up into cardboard boxes to be sold at the market.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core tension we're looking at in the source material today. I mean, we've just walked through this fascinating, perfectly synchronized mechanical process that yields these spectacular outputs, right? Bangles in sunny gold, paddy green, royal blue. But look at the inputs. Look at the actual environment where all of this happens. The source is pink, this really vivid, almost shocking picture of the centers of this industry. Places like Firozabad. We're talking stinking, garbage-choked lanes, crumbling walls, and these dingy little cells that are entirely devoid of fresh air or adequate light. The physical beauty of the final product is just in direct, stark contrast to the incredibly grim, hazardous reality of where they are actually made.
Now, let's shift gears a bit and see how this builds a much wider picture of systemic poverty. To do that, we need to look at another community detailed in the sources, Seemapuri. Geographically speaking, it's just on the periphery of Delhi, but metaphorically, it is miles and miles away. If we go back to the 1970s, it was basically a wilderness where refugees set up temporary transit homes. But today, its evolution is just incredibly bleak. It has turned into this massive, sprawling settlement made up of 675 slums housing around 10,000 ragpickers. You've got entire families living in these makeshift structures made out of mud, roofed with scrap tin and tarpaulin. And they're surviving out there with absolutely no sewage system, zero drainage, and no running water at all.
To truly understand the daily human struggle happening here, we really have to look at the numbers. The average daily income for a ragpicker in Seemapuri? It's an incredibly meager $2 to $3. That is the entirety of their daily bread, period. And because these financial constraints are just so severe, mere survival completely eclipses any thought of education. In fact, surveys show that nearly 10%, actually 9.76% to be exact, of children in Delhi end up dropping out of school primarily due to these crushing financial limitations. When your whole family is surviving on $2 a day, well, every single set of hands is needed just to put food on the table.
But what's really striking is how the children living in this reality view their work. Take a young ragpicker named Saheb, who's highlighted in the source text. His perspective on this labor is profoundly unique. To kids like him, garbage is literally gold. For the adults, scrounging through these huge dumps is strictly a means of basic survival. It's just how they afford to keep a leaking roof over their heads. But for children like Saheb, sifting through the garbage is actually wrapped in a sense of wonder. There's always that slim, tantalizing hope that today's the day they'll find a stray silver coin, or maybe a 10-rupee note hidden away amidst all that refuse.
So the crucial point here is that whether we look at Seemapuri or go back to Firozabad, the sources reveal this deeply tragic, recurring theme of lost childhood. Back in Firozabad, which again is the absolute center of India's glassblowing industry, the statistics are just staggering. An estimated 20,000 children are working illegally in those 1,400-degree furnaces we talked about earlier. Instead of being in school, they spend their daylight hours slogging away in these dark, cramped hutments, hunched over the flickering oil lamps of the jar dye process. And because their eyes become more adjusted to the dark than they do to actual natural light, there's a severely higher risk of these kids losing their eyesight entirely before they even reach adulthood.
And right in the middle of all this immense hardship, you find these truly heartbreaking strokes of irony. Remember Saheb, the young ragpicker we mentioned who was scrounging for gold in the garbage? Well, his full name is actually Saheb Alam, and that translates to Lord of the Universe. As the author notes, if he actually knew what his name meant, he'd probably have a really hard time believing it. Instead, completely unaware of what his name represents, this so-called Lord of the Universe just roams the streets as part of this army of barefoot boys, totally disconnected from their own inherent worth, and just trapped in a daily fight for survival.
Over time, though, these environments take way more than just a physical toll, they take a massive psychological one as well. Back in those bangle factories, the grandmother of a young boy named Mukesh actually justifies their grueling life with this exact quote. It is his kadam, his destiny. Her own husband went blind from the glass dust, yet this systemic cycle just continues. When families are born into the caste of bangle makers, living their whole lives in slums, the heavy burden of poverty is frequently rationalized as just a God-given lineage. Years of mind-numbing toil essentially kill any initiative to even try to imagine a different life, totally extinguishing the very ability to dream.
Which really leaves us with this final, vital question to ponder. Can a seemingly God-given lineage of poverty ever truly be broken? I mean, when the absolute lack of drainage, the 1,400-degree furnaces, and those $2 daily wages are quite literally all you've ever known, how do you even begin to step out of that cycle? The next time you see a beautiful, sparkling glass bangle catching the light, remember the intricate mechanical ballet that created it. But more importantly, remember the hidden human cost, the soot, the sweat, and the stolen childhoods that ultimately paid for its shine. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer today. Keep questioning and keep learning.